these are the results of sponsor scientists and researchers conducting research into ethical mass production. Therefore, opening government is positive action improvement and opening opposition by Lucas Government. On opposing government and Amre Arishi, on opposing opposition bar at. As much time as you said.
You already have things like ITC or ICJ or any kind of like due process investigation process under the international framework. We never think that it is just to like use this method to assassinate a person and seek for some kind of productive solution, because it fundamentally denies the rights of these people and it's fundamentally disproportionate to the kinds of acts that these people have been engaging in. So who are the kinds of scientists or researchers are we talking about? We are talking about like wide range of like scientists who, like for example, like Einstein, like engaged in like creating atomic bomb and he contributed in like US creating atomic bomb, or things like Nobel like created dynamite. It was a weapon to contribute a mass destruction, or even if we were also willing to like admit that there might be like researchers in terrorist organizations who are willing to fight for that terrorist group, but we never think that it is just to assassinate all of those people. And what is assassination? We think that assassination is a method to murder a person secretly or behind like the due process of investigation. That is to say, we're going to compare this to using like prosecution system or like things like ITC or ICJ so that we can have like due process of investigation on the outside house. We think that opposition side needs to prove two things in order to justify this assassination in any kind of situation. First, that it is a justifiable method. That is to say, to use the method of assassination to a perpetrator of like any kind of deeply immoral act, and secondly, that these researchers or scientists have actually like committed that deeply immoral act, and it is proportionate to like murder those people. So I'm going to give you two arguments from the Prime Minister. First, that there is no principle of justification in assassinating a person, no matter what kind of deeply immoral act a person has committed it. And secondly, I'm going to tell you why actually these researchers or scientists have never like committed that deeply immoral act to the extent that they deserve a death. Yes?
If I'm a scientist and I make weapons, like chemical weapons that are used in Syria, isn't that immoral in itself?
Yes, it might be immoral to some extent, but it's not immoral to the extent that they deserve assassination. Firstly, to look at the principal justification of assassination. Because we, on the basis, believe that any kind of citizen in this international society like deserves some level of fundamental human rights, and they should in order for them to be killed or taken away a great part of their right, they have to go through this due process of law. So, as I told you, like every citizen ought to be treated properly, like through the due process of investigation, and that's how we're going to compare this assassination solution to like things like prosecution system. We tell you it is bad fundamentally, no thank you, because like assassination is like just killing you and taking away all of your right for like I'm not saying that it's not for no reason, but you're not really weighing up the kinds of like culpability that person have, or like whether it's really proper solution, or whether that there was like enough truth or fact that that person has deeply committed in that deeply immoral act. Just because that this like assassination method is a way to murder a person like secretly, or just like enacted by like some country's agents by their own decision. But secondly, we tell you that this is bad, that this is never a justifiable solution, because it is never productive anyway. Because like maybe the opposition side is going to say that it is good to make a productive solution in deterring these kind of acts, or to like stopping like people creating mass destructions. But what you like hinder under their side house is that you like just like create this assassination and make this solution, make the problem as solvent. That is to say, once you just like identify a person that is like thought to be a perpetrator of the act, and you don't really investigate it in the background or like structure that person were able to create mass destruction weapons, or we would say to the extent that these kinds of assassination will only be acted by countries like Russia or US, that is to say most of the mass destruction weapons that are created in the US and Russia won't be like stopped anyway. So at the end, we tell you that it is never like justifiable, at least in the comparison with other persecution system. And we tell you other persecution system does like reasonably work at least better than their side of the house. Because we would tell you if you go through like ICC or ICJ, the investigator is going to like investigate all the kinds of facts that were hidden like behind the structure or in the environment, and we can find out like what was the problem and the culpability of that person, and if necessary, some country might punish that person according to law. No, thank you. Moving on to my second argument, I say why these researchers were not that culpable to the extent that they deserve assassination. The first premise here is that oftentimes these researchers were coerced or brainwashed to make these kinds of mass destruction weapons. For example, like if a like autocratic regime like find out good reputed researchers, that government like might like threaten his security of his family, and just say that if you do not like contribute to making a mass destruction weapon for our government, we will threat your family or we'll threat your life, so just do it. Or oftentimes these like governments or like any kind of terrorist organization brainwash these people using their ideology. We never think that we think that in these kinds of situations, these researchers were just a marionette of these other bad actors and not the perpetrator itself. But secondly, even if not to that extent, lots of times like these like scientists actually opposed to creating these kinds of mass destruction, even if they're willing to research and finding out some scientific facts. For example, Alfred Nobel or like Albert Einstein, like at the end of the day, they turned out to be a very peaceful scientist who tried to push this peace ideology. But thirdly, even if they're perfectly willing to commit in like killing other people and creating mass destruction, they are not the exact enabler of mass destruction. That is to say, there are commanders who enacted the act of mass destruction, that is to say, the leaders of the government or the leaders of a terrorist organization. And I would refer to the fundamental principle of the criminal justice system. That is to say, the criteria is that your act has directly caused harm beyond a reasonable doubt. We never think that just creating a tool really contribute to killing other people. You need an enabler or the actor who will use that tool. And scientists are not the one who use the tool in and of itself. So for all those reasons, we're proud to propose. Thank you very much.
Let's invite your opposition.
We think that the biochemical weapons that were made by scientists within Syria that allowed the civilians to suffer a massive amount of severe damages, but also a massive amount of people dying because of the creation of that, were things that the international community cannot stand by with. We think that the fact that these individuals are allowed and given a leeway of being able to create these kind of weapons in and of itself is something that is immoral in status quo, and we do a lot of things in status quo right now, like what the previous speaker has said, in order to stop individuals from creating all such things. We say from opening opposition that in instances when states refuse to cooperate with the international community but enforce themselves, not enforce themselves, but like force these scientists to create these specific weapons, or negotiate with these scientists to create these specific weapons in order to use them, for example, to subvert, to engage with their citizens, for example, in civilian wars, for example. We think in those instances, when they do not listen to the pressures coming from the international community, it is justified for the international community to be able to enact doing these assassinations in order to assure the bigger humanity that exists. No thank you for the international community's interest at that. And that's the reason why we are proud to propose this motion under our bench. What are the two things I'm going to argue in today's debate? Firstly, I want to talk about what are the instances that these are justified, and I'm going to lay out the standards for when and why the international community can enact these specific assassinations. Secondly, I want to talk about why these scientists are legitimate targets in warfare, directly engaging to most of the things that they are talking about with my substantive. But before I proceed to that, I want to engage them on two levels under two levels that do not fit into my arguments. Number one was this whole idea that the ICC and the ICJ already exist. Therefore, we already have mechanisms to be able to prosecute these individuals. No, thank you. First things we say is that when you use the ICC and the ICJ, you prosecute leaders of that countries, never the scientists that actually create those weapons, right? Therefore, we think that there is a problem mismatch with what they're trying to enact in today's debate. Under their bench, at their best case scenario, we do not think that they're able to stop the creation of these the weapons of mass destruction at their best, right? So we don't think that they're fully providing a solution towards the creation of all these weapons of mass destruction, right? Moreover, we say that, no, thank you, under their bench, there's no deterrent mechanism existing for preventing the creation of these weapons of mass destruction, right? The fact that Syria right now was still able to create and use that to their own civilians is already a testament to the fact that status quo itself is not sufficiently able to engage with the fact that these weapons are being created, right? So we don't really think that the alternative that they were talking about is something that is viable, but moreover is something that is effective in the fight against the creation of these weapons of mass destruction. But secondly, they characterize these scientists as people who are not culpable because of the fact that they are brainwashed by the state. First is that we want to challenge this premise because of the fact that it's just simply not true. Most instances, when you're talking about scientists who are in Syria, for example, who are creating the chemical weapons, for example, or the scientists who are creating weapons, for example, in Iraq, or even the people who are creating the nuclear weapons, for example, in North Korea, these individuals are given massive amount of monetary incentive in exchange for them to be able to do so. So what is the point of this analysis? The point of this analysis is basically to say that these are individuals who made the rational calculus and the moral calculus to opt into this very specific choice, and it's not as if they were going to be tortured by the state, for example, if they were to opt into this, right? So we don't really think that analysis stands at that point. So given that, I'm going to engage them on, given to that, what is the stance of the opposition as a whole in this debate? We don't really think that we have to justify assassinating scientists in all instances, but the only burden that we have in today's debate is to prove to you that there are specific instances in which we are able to justify the assassinations of these scientists. So what are those instances, right? Let's move on directly to the first argument. Why are there certain instances where this is justified, right? The reason why there are certain instances where this is justified is because of the fact that international politics has already failed us in those very specific instances. Because there are instances, for example, when there are peace deals that are constructed but they are broken by states. For example, the ones that existed in Syria, where there was a peace deal, they broke it by using the chemical weapons against their own civilians, for example, or even sanctions that we are opposing in Syria, for example. No, thank you. The fact that it targets them and makes them and immobilizes them, but they still keep on creating these biochemical weapons and still keeps on using them to the opposing forces of the Assad regime, for example. So all of those things are things that are instances where negotiations and pressures coming from the international community has failed, and the international community has no capability in being able to support the humanity of the individuals that are existing within Syria, for example, or within North Korea, for example, or in designated areas where these weapons are going to be used, right? We say that in these instances, no thank you, that when the international community is unable to use every due process that exists in status quo to be able to persecute certain individuals for the heinous acts that they are doing, we think that the next thing that the international community must do is, in order to be able to preserve that peace, is to be able to intervene unilaterally in those specific instances. And we say that in these instances, when the international community needs to intervene into those scenarios, they try to minimize the amount of damage that they are doing, right? This is where assassination comes in today's debate. No, thank you. The fact that assassination only targets the individuals who are directly culpable of the creation of those heinous things means that the actions that they are doing are proportionate at that opening.
Even if we were to admit due process is unavailable, that's an argument to capture that person. Why is it proportionate to murder that person?
It's proportionate to murder that person because in the immediate time that we are talking about, we're not just in a context of like everybody's just like having tea, for example, in their houses, right? We're obviously talking about in a context where we are in a war zone. So the fact that even if you try like things like, for example, try these individuals and try to send them to international criminal courts, for example, they're not really willing to actually go into those specific courts, and they're just like not gonna show up, for example, or they're not actually willing to surrender in those very specific instances, right? We're talking about the instances where these weapons could be used, like literally, like for example, from the next day that it's actually already developed, so it's justified for us to be able to target them before those weapons are actually developed, right? But lastly, let's talk about very simply. Let's talk about why these scientists are legitimate targets in warfare. It is because of the fact that these are scientists who are state-sponsored and they're similar to soldiers. The fact that when you're engaging in war and you're able to shoot down a soldier for self-defense, we think applies for the same reason as to why you can attack these individuals in these very specific instances. Because we think that the international community has the ability and has the responsibility, but moreover has the right to be able to use self-defense in instances where they need to protect the better case of humanity for these individuals. For all those reasons and more, we are proud to oppose the motion.
I think we need to appreciate their speech. Let's invite the 3 comments. Turn here.
Coming from speeches coming from the leader of the opposition, at the end of the day, I cannot understand why they want to monitor them. They say there is no way to other than monitor them because they cannot capture this amount of data. During the warfare, there is no other way to do that. But simply you can shoot like sleep guns to this person and make them sleep and capture, and take a due process and make a like due process in that due proportionate punishment is going to be done. So at the end of the day, as a Deputy Prime Minister, I'm going to qualify firstly our justification of assassination itself. The secondly, let's talk about the culpability. First, our justification. Where's the implication? And what will the developing firstly, our justification. Where's the implication of ignoring the due process and ignoring the itself? They say to assure the bigger humanity into the international community, we're justified to kill them. There is totally unjustifiable, there is totally immoral. Meaning, they are arbitrarily evaluating humanity based on their own metric and compare the humanity with other person. This is a kind of principle which underlies in slavery or misogynistic viewpoint, or things like racism, this kind of thing. You're evaluating certain individual based on your arbitral metric and say you deserve less than the other person who live in international society. So at the end of the day, and here comes the importance or significance of due process. Because we do not want to be, we do want to assume that every single people are totally equal. And this metric should not be arbitrary. We have to fix this metric just for the sake of equality or the peace of our society. And this is the justification which we have to assure. But under zero standard health, because this person seems to be much more culpable and seems to be it seems to be much more like an easiest way to get the piece into society. They try to evaluate them in an arbitral metric. This is not something we can be told simply because we cannot we do not want to make this metric arbitral one. So this is a point with and this is the building proof to this opposition side, because they totally missing and they totally rely on the YouTube calculation, which means they try to oppose or affirm the slavery or misogynistic viewpoint. Moving on to the part of the culpability. Our argumentation of the culpability is really simple. First, we cannot properly evaluate or directly evaluate the culpability of this kind of individual, because as Markson said, these kind of states might be or have high probability to be far away from the international community, or they refuse to be connected to the international community. Meaning, it is much harder to evaluate probability or evaluate the environment or investigate the environment which scientist is going to be in under the data score. And it is much harder to evaluate these kind of scientists have high probability to be moving based on the only monetary incentive or this kind of thing. And meaning, moreover, we say, and even if they are doing kind of researches based on monetary incentive, this monetary incentive is going to be much harder high probability to be contingent upon their birth environment or birth possibility itself. Because first of all, the conclusion of this argumentation here is that most of the culpability is much harder to be evaluated simply because this culpability itself or this their act itself is going to be constructed through the environment they're in, and they cannot choose from the beginning. And moreover, we say, even if there's a case, there is kind of monetary incentive or this kind of incentive or this kind of thing, the contribution metric itself is much harder to evaluate from the beginning. If you want to make the contribution to this the production of mass destruction want to be metric, you have to, for example, history of science itself is contributing so much to the extent of this production and mass destruction, or things like factory workers might be also. And if these kind of people are working based on the monetary incentive, and they are recognizing that they are making arms that for the mass destruction, we think these kind of factory workers or these kind of scientists is in an equal situation, or there is not qualitative difference. So even the opposition side, they have to kill them, but there is not totally disproportion, right? Simply because they are not doing this kind of thing based on their own, and they are not having so much culpability. So at the end of the day, first you cannot evaluate culpability based upon your own evaluation, and moreover, we say from the first beginning, their act itself is totally constructed by the environment which they are in, and they cannot choose from the very beginning of their birth. We think this culpability metric itself is totally significant. Is not significant at all. And they say Marx's leader of the opposition said because they are making the arms mass destruction, and they are totally immoral, so we can kill them. So, but we are talking about the extent itself, right? And we have to evaluate the extent, and we have to make a due the amount of the punishment for these kind of individual or sanction for these kind of individual. Therefore, we have the due process itself. Therefore, we cannot be we should not introduce arbitral metric. Any POI, you say. Okay. Let me clarify our stance. First, as an opening government, we clarify two things. First, the assassination itself is unjustifiable simply because we should not arbitrarily evaluate humanity. The line coming from the opposition side is simply because this kind of humanity deserves to be killed simply because there is a much more bigger humanity in society. But this metric or this calculation itself is totally unjustifiable. This is the point the opening government already told you. Secondly, we talked about the culpability, and we think culpability itself is first, we cannot evaluate it properly, and second, even if we can do it at the end of the day, I think the amount of the culpability itself cannot deserve to be killed, to be murdered in the assassination, in the made them into vacuum. Therefore, we think opposition side cannot prove the burden of law. At the end of the day, law duty proves.
So let's be clear about what the kind of burden proof they embrace in this way. So they have to prove in any case, regardless of the like trivial conditions, why it is unjustifiable. And the main contention from government's bank is one, it's post choice. But we have already proven that certain cases are done with the rational calculation and consent. We don't think that for just simple argumentation, the one line of the post choice can be the reason for them to take this. And the second reason is that we shouldn't take away life of the individual. But the moment they conceded that after due procedure we can take away the life, that just simple principle that life is important cannot make sense. What is remaining under this house is that the necessity to take due procedure. So from my speech, I will wrap down this argumentation by saying that why we have to assassinate the very person who are researching and why it's justified. Before that, several reflections to the previous speaker. First of all, Deputy Prime Minister said that we should not compare humanity because it's immoral, misogynistic, etc., etc. Several responses here. First of all, as my partner has already given to you, and there was no refutation from their house, is that as an individual or neighboring country or even as a world, we have the right to self-defense, meaning we think we have the right to compare my life and other people's life and to prioritize our life and our humanity. Therefore, we do not think that this argumentation is enough to crack down our argumentation. The second of all, we do not think that just a CGS principle or such kind of vague concept should apply to this motion. Why? Because this debate is about warfare and conflict principle. Therefore, we think, especially in the warfare principle, there are several specific important principles. First of all, public sector is deprioritized for the protection of innocent civilians. Why? First of all, because public sectors are deemed to concede to participate in the warfare, for example, as my partner has already given to you, or even if public sector hasn't conceded, at the fact that they are actively engaging into war, shows that they have much more capability compared to the innocent civilians who are not doing anything wrong. Therefore, the armies are more legitimate target than the innocent civilians in the warfare, for example. In this case, those researchers, no matter what they consider that they are post choice or not, the fact that they are actively engaging into the type of mass killing researches shows that they are deserving less priority compared with the protection of the mass civilians. They just argue the birth or environmental factor exists, but the fact that they engage, also the innocent civilians or neighboring country are born in such kind of area with the mass killing weapons by the birth or environmental factor, we don't think that such kind of less comparative analysis can be applied to this motion. Go.
There's a time gap between their conducting research and the tool is being used, and there's a difference in that they are not the ones that triggers that. Why their existence is so emergently dangerous enough to justify self?
This is my argument, so let's simply listen to that. So first, there are three issues in my argumentation. One is that why we should kill the very person who are researching in that sexual mass killing. The reason is quite simple. If we don't kill that person, the information, know-how, technologies they have accumulated will be leaked or utilized by the other researchers. Therefore, we should terminate their very life, but in order for us to eliminate any other possibility for the future process to continue such kind of research, because the fact that those mass killing weapons can exist in the society is a very enough threat for the mass civilian or innocent people. Therefore, we have to terminate the very person's life in the first place. And the second issue, much more importantly, is that we have to minimize casualties. This is quite important, seriously, because we think that not only that due procedure they want to protect, they want to achieve is unavailable, but also it's less relevant when we consider the war principle. Because the fact that states declare war or declare to start conflict can be enough witness which we can deem them to consider to be involved to the war. Then what is important is not to kill anyone in the warfare, but to minimize, but to resolve the conflict or progress with the minimum casualties. Then how we can think the minimizing casualty under the task is much more important issue. There are two reasons why we can minimize casualties. First of all, before the creation, before the usage of a weapon, we can surely terminate such kind of possibility that those weapons to be used. They're just arguing that those people are not culpable because they are not using that. But the fact that they are engaging into the very process of creation shows that at least there should be
even portionally, they all the capability for the creation of those such kind of mass-killing destruction of the weapons. Therefore, we think if we compare like number of casualties, especially when they also hold certain portion of the capability, we think we can surely decrease the casualties in the first place. Because before the usage of those weapons, we can surely terminate that kind of possibility to be used. But secondly, if we become realistic and compare both paradigms, we think actually, and compare with alternative methods to prevent such kind of usage of weapons, we think our side is much better. Why? Sit down, please. Because, like, regardless of the United Nations decision, anyway, United States or Russia will ignore and arbitrary sanction or even bomb Syria, for example, by chemical weapons. Then what is important is the comparison between other methods and assassination. Because under their sovereign house, like for example, Trump will arbitrarily bomb or carpet bomb or even use chemical weapons to prevent or to retaliate for the usage of chemical weapons. Then such kind of alternative method will involve massive amount of innocent civilians. Then under our sovereign house, we can finish this problem by the minimum casualties because we can just kill researchers and that's all. We think we can actually decrease the casualties. It's much more better. Sit down, please. And the last issue is about, even if we assume that certain due procedure can be done, we think that's not enough. Why? Because we need smooth solution to minimize casualties. There are two reasons why. First of all, even if ICC, ICJ, or somewhat any kind of like somewhat new judicial international actor can opt into and enter in such kind of situations, it still needs consent of the very fact those people, because ICC or ICJ or any other judicial institution cannot act without the consent of that targeted person. Therefore, we think, and more secondly, that even if consent is not needed or somewhat is not important, still such a judicial procedure takes much amount of time for several years. We think during that kind of terms, that know-how those researchers accumulated into their brain will be like, for example, transferred to the other researchers, or those facilities will be utilized by the other researchers. We think that to minimize the casualties who are involved, innocent civilians who are involved in the usage of chemical weapons. Therefore, we say under the house, without a judicial procedure, we can surely minimize casualties. We think that's much more important concerning when those researchers might have calculated and consented to the creation of the weapons, and also the innocent civilians should be prioritized by public sector in warfare. We are happy to hold.
For their speech, that concludes the opening half of the debate. To start the closing half, let's invite Member Bowman.
I think the ideal situation for all is to simply kill Trump, right? Because first, when they say that they want to minimize casualties and they want a smooth solution, I think probably the best scenario that would happen under their case is when they just kill off Trump rather than assassinating these scientists and researchers, right? But let's just go on to some logical results before we go on to my arguments. So when they talk about I think the Orwell's frame was that it was very focused on the time frame of wartime and focused on a very idealized setting for them where it's already in a state of war, right? But first, there's no mention in the motion that's in a state of war. So I think that the closing opposition should engage better to us in that way. And not only that, even if it's a time of wartime, we think that soldiers and scientists are completely different, right? We think that researchers don't get a say in using the weapons. Not only that, we don't think that they have a direct method of using these weapons upon these civilians in the first place. So, and not only that, when they come up to the podium and say that they want to minimize casualties, we want to say that we also want to minimize casualties. But first, we tell you that killing these people don't ensure the minimization in the first place. We tell you that when it's a state-sponsored research, this research will go on. The state will always find new researchers and new scientists to begin, to continue their research at the end of the day. Not only that, we tell you that because you're not targeting the ones who should be targeted, right? Because you're not targeting those who have a direct decision, who have a say in the direct decision making. So that's why I'm telling you that you should instead just kill off Trump, right? Because that's what's probably the most ideal situation for you. When we tell you that these scientists and researchers are probably only involved in the process of just simply making these weapons, but they don't really get a say in where they're going to use these weapons, or how they're going to use these weapons, whether they're going to be used or not. We don't think that these people have a say in it, right? So we think that their target is completely mismatched in this situation. So then let's go on to our unique extension from the closing comment, right? So first, we're going to talk about the characteristic of state-sponsored research and how it's unjustified to kill off these people. Second, we also want to talk about why sacrificing individuals cannot be justified when it comes to a state-sponsored research, and how also citizens are also indirectly related to this research. No, thank you. So let's go on to the characteristics, right? So first, we think that the first characteristic of state-sponsored research is that the aim of the research and it is usually decided by the state. Not only that, these kind of researchers are usually commissioned by the state. What I mean by this is that these researchers and scientists are not the ones who are actively aiming to create weapons that may have the possibility to kill a lot of people. Second, the characteristic is that the process of research is interfered by the state until the research is finished, right? In other words, there are going to be like constant checkups and constant reports that are required by the state. And why is this? Because states are also spending a lot of money in this research. They don't want to waste their money, especially in countries that already have public pressure to cut spending on security. So in other words, we tell you that the progress of this research and the direction of these research are both chosen by the state in this kind of case. And so why is it unjustified then? Because we tell you that the main actor of this research is therefore the state, not the scientists and researchers. We think that these people are simply just workers in their field, rather than like murderers or killers like Hitler as the opposition tries to draw, right? We think that they're just working for their own self-actualization and to earn money, right? We think that they're more like, they're not really like those killers as opposition brings. So we tell you that the problem with these as I tell you from the characteristics, what we tell you, I'll take it later. What we're telling you is that first, the target is wrong, right? We think that when you say that you're going to assassinate these people, you're basically telling me that the reason behind this assassination is probably because you want to like retribute and punish these people for creating like such weapons and for greater good, right? But these people aren't the ones who have a bigger voice in this decision-making process anyway. So even if you kill off these people, like you're not going to be able to minimize these casualties at the end of the day. Also, we tell you that the method is wrong because we also think that killing can never be justified, and it also can rather lead to a slippery slope, which I'll also talk about in the second argument. But before I go on, I also want to talk about the distinction between research of weapons of mass destruction and other fields, like other scientific fields, right? Because I think that we also want to talk about, like, why are you just specifically killing like all these people in the research of weapons of mass destruction? We tell you that the line between these kind of research in the specific motion and other kinds of scientific like research is very, very blurry, right? If mass destruction is basically killing many number of people, the problem is that the line of possibility and potential of mass destruction is very, very like unclear to begin with in any kind of technology, right? So when it comes to nuclear weapons, for example, Einstein started off his research with the idea of human benefit. Not only that, when Noble started inventing dynamite, he didn't do it to kill off many people. He just started working as a part-time job and he was playing with some chemicals until he got a dynamite. So we're telling you that the potential of this technology being created for mass destruction is very blurry from the very get-go. If you're going to tell me that you're going to assassinate these people, we think that rather it's a very dangerous thing to do because what it does is that you're basically creating a room to kill off more people in the future when it comes to a potential weapon that can kill off many people, right? We think that the possibility of such creation of such room and sacrificing these individuals who are basically very, very indirectly related to that destruction in the first place is a very dangerous thing, right? We think that this kind of killing can never be justified from the very get-go if you cannot clearly draw the line from the start of the research. And then we want to talk about why sacrificing itself is very bad. Yes, sir.
Look, your burden in today's debate is to justify that it is never justified in all instances, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to engage in the context that we provided in today's debate, that when peace deals are not working, that when sanctions aren't working, when you cannot negotiate with these individuals, what are you going to do?
So we're telling you that basically what you're telling me is that there is a state of warfare and so on. We told you that just because you kill off these people, it's still going to not minimize these casualties because we tell you in a state-sponsored research, it's going to happen anyway. These weapons are going to be created weapons, especially in the context that you draw, because basically when you can't make any peaceful solutions, these countries are going to want to fight with weapons at the end of the day, right? So let's talk about why we're telling you that sacrificing these few innocent individuals under the name of greater good is never going to work. First, we tell you that the greater good can never be achieved, as I told you before. Second, we told you even if we do achieve greater good, it's very wrong to kill off these individuals in the first place because because in this specific motion, you're basically putting unfair responsibility and you're blaming individuals for something that the rest of the state is also responsible before. So basically what I'm telling you is that the researchers and scientists aren't the only actors responsible for this the creation of this mass destruction, right? So we're basically telling that the citizens are also part of this research. Their money is exactly what is funding these research in the first place. It's and creating these weapons. So what I mean is that this starts from the politicians that these citizens vote for. How much like active interest they have in using their tax and so on. We think that, and whether like they're actually pressuring these states to not make any weapons. So for these reasons, we're very proud to propose. Thank you.
The number of government employees. Let's invite the member of opposition. They're here.
Thank you, Honorable Judge. Unfortunately, in this debate, the government side can win our side or the stance. Because, like our burden of proof, the opposite statement of today's motion is this House believes that can be justifiable to associating state-sponsored research. Because that is why we have the legitimate reason to limit the context. And we both, we as the closing opposition also want to focus on the extraordinary occasion that actually killing is justifiable. Killing is justifiable in the wartime. And I'd like to add the mechanism why those kind of condition that actually those kind of killing is justifiable. I'd like to use the rhetoric that self-defense, because opening opposition slightly talk about self-defense, but actually we have to add what is actually self-defense and what condition in self-defense we can justifiably kill people. As a closing government, this I'd like to extend this very important condition. So I have, based on this, I have two things to talk about. Firstly, I'd like to clarify today's principle that the opposition side has. When we can actually kill people in the wartime in terms of self-defense. And secondly, I would like to explain the applicability. Why killing those kind of researcher, even if a researcher can be also justifiable and in terms of self-defense. I'll explain more about. Okay, so all rebuttal will be integrated. So okay.
I think you have to make a distinction between soldiers who carry weapons and these scientists do not really carry weapons standing in front of you. Why can't you just capture that person?
That is exactly what we're going to state. So let's moving on. So principle. So in the international society, there are some extraordinary cases that killing is justifiable. It is namely the wartime, right? There is actually an international law that say it is justifiable to kill people in order to protect yourself, right? That is why people have the self-defense, collective self-defense, right? The point here is that the fact that they in order to protect themselves, whether it is not actually proportionate, whether he or she has the great intention to kill people, we can kill them. Or that is why he is forced to join the military because of his extreme poorness, or yet he kill nobody. We can kill him because in order to protect us, right? That is why even if he do not have the intention to kill others and just carry weapons in order to the military, we can kill him because we need to protect us, right? That is why the whole the AOG's argument, the fundamental the right or the intention to kill is actually gone away, right? So why it is justifiable? Okay, so
It is self-defense that actually opening opposition like slightly talked about, right? There's actually three conditions in terms in terms of self-defense. Firstly, the purpose. You know that the purpose is to protect themselves. If this is to protect themselves, like we can justifiably kill him or in order to protect him. And secondly, it is the emergency case, right? If it is emergency case, if we wait for like those kind of another issue that the government's help or like international society's help, if those kind of alternative way cannot help us, we can use our power to protect themselves. And thirdly, the balance between giving harm and like the receiving harm, right? So if those kind of like the giving harm is not so, is not like bigger than receiving harm, it is justifiable. This is the condition of the self-defense. It is actually applicable to the nation CGS system or international CGS system that actually law clearly say. That is why it is applicable to this motion. So let's moving on by today's like the very important argument, like the applicability to the like the scientists and researchers. So let's like examine one by one. The purpose. It is very clear. Because weapon created by scientists kill your nation, your people, like actually the millions of people. That is why the purpose, like that level, it is clear, right? It actually we suit the purpose of the like self-defense. And secondly, like that, like a balance between like giving harm and receiving harm, right? Actually, as I said in the first point, those kind of weapons actually kill millions of people, but versus we kill one scientist, right? That is why actually the balance is also okay. But why assassinate? They somehow cast a doubt why assassination is not so like workable. But actually they said like the government anyway hire next scientist. But to respond, firstly, like those kind of researchers incentive. Oh, previous like researcher actually assassinated by like those kind of like opponent. That is why naturally we can state that those kind of next like the researcher do not have the incentive to join those kind of like the projects in the first place. And secondly, nation's incentive. It is actually unproductive, right? It's not productive. Even if we hire the next researcher, they will be killed. Or it is actually justifiable to kill, right? That is why like the government like the higher, that is why okay, his argument, like this argument is like completely go away. And even if they can hire, at least we can delay those kind of projects itself. That is why this is very important to associate to like those kind of delay. And because we can create a period to settle down those kind of war. That is why war may be like over or something like that. That is why this delaying is very important. And third condition, emergency case. If we wait for ICC to deal with this scientist and stop those kind of action, it is too late, right? They have to prosecute and like collectivize like evidence and then actually talked a lot and then we stop those kind of researchers. But actually, during those kind of procedure, actually those kind of weapons actually created and those kind of weapons will be like kill your nation, right? That is why there's no any reason why like the alternative way can be actually solve this problem. That is why there's emergency, right? That is why this purpose is to protect yourself, and then actually killing one people in order to protect millions of people, and then it is a very emergency case. That is why we can, in the extraordinary case, namely wartime, we can justify to kill those kind of researchers. Thank you.
Once you give a unilateral the power to make power to a nation to unilaterally decide whether to intervene in this issue or not, it actually threatens the international security. But furthermore, as my member have constantly told you, the issue of science is an area which has blurry it's the line between weaponizing and the line between the developing of science is in itself is also an arbitrary line to begin with. But furthermore, we told you that this motion does not have solvency to begin with because you're not targeting the main actor in this issue, which wasn't really properly engaged by neither of the government opposition benches. Having said that, two issues in this debate. Number one, state versus scientists, who really should be the blame to begin with. But secondly, also regarding the greater good narrative and how it actually does not solve anything. So number one, regarding the issue of state versus scientists. So they came up to the bench came up to the podium and talked about how scientists may need these kind of individual calculus, for example, like monetary incentive. The thing here is this: as we have told you, the characteristics of science is actually blurry, and because of that arbitrary line, abuse of justification is possible if we allow these states to unilaterally decide whether this wasn't weaponized, whether this wasn't the purpose of weapon, or whether it wasn't the purpose of development. But moreover, in this issue, the OG tried to tackle this issue by saying that that was a false choice, a coarse choice. My member exclusively told you regarding this. We analyzed how in this process the main actor is the government. The main actor in this issue is the government, and how the research is carried out. She told you that when it comes to this issue, it's the government who has the bigger voice, and how it's the main actor. But furthermore, they also talked about the issue about how peace deal broken by a state and the international community cannot do anything. This is a situation in which international community cannot do anything. So, who broke the deal to begin with? It was the government of that state, it wasn't the individuals. So in the end, you're actually shifting the accountability, responsibility of that decision to the very individual scientist. But furthermore, my member also told you how the issue of responsibility isn't just solely on the scientists themselves. When it comes to these kind of issues, there has been a collective underlying collective consensus by the state in general. For example, she told you how these monies, the funds for these research was provided by the citizens, or also completely by the state itself. In that sense, you cannot just also the issue of accountability and responsibility in this issue is also a blurry thing to begin with. But secondly, regarding the issue of greater good narrative, they told you how this is a legitimate target because these people are sort of soldiers, and this is a warfare thing. We told you that such developments doesn't just happen only during the warfare, but we also told you that they didn't have a say in deciding how this weapons, how this technology is going to be used in these warfare. But furthermore, they also talked about the issue of right security issues, and it talked about how this is a situation in which a nation felt threatened because of a country developing these weapons. But before that, yes.
So your entire argument is unrealistic because according to your logic, the money for military is funded by the citizen, and where to intervene is decided by the prime minister. Then we cannot kill even soldiers. Your argument is simply unrealistic.
So we're saying that you cannot just hold the accountability towards the scientists, because also we told you that this motion is not going to have any solvency or not. So having said that, regarding the right and security issues, so according to their logic, these consents amongst the international community takes time, and judicial process takes time, and this is an immediate situation. The thing is this: such judicial power exists in order to prevent hasty decisions and prevent unilateral decisions by a single state. Once you start allowing such unilateral decisions to happen, it harms the legitimacy of the international organizations and it harms the process of
international consensus to begin with. But furthermore, they also talked about how this is in the name of future humanity, and the international community should act. The thing is this: these international community that they're talking about is probably these kind of Western nations, which are powerful nations, such as the Western nations or like Russia to begin with. The thing is this: if you're allowing, you're actually giving ways for such nations to abuse this justification that their national security is being threatened. Also, the issue of national security is that so according to their logic, they're giving these nations to define whether themselves are being not like threatened, their security is threatened, and then that's why it's actually harmful, and which opens possibility for further abusing of such power or justification. Also, we told you at the end of the day, the greater good doesn't stand. This is because there's no solvency by just assassinating these scientists. As my member have told you, in the perspective of the nations which actually have these projects, these scientists are people who are replaceable to be replaceable. So in that sense, even if you actually murder these scientists, these development will still happen. The benefits that they propose regarding how they are going to prevent mass casualties will still happen at the end of the day. So on the comparative, we told you how this doesn't have solvency, this doesn't have justification, in that sense that the opposition bench do not really have an exclusive benefit. We think that in all situations, such assassinations shouldn't be justified. Thank you.
Speech to conclude this debate elected by opposition.
Thank you, Chair. So we will debate at the end of the day. It should be the opposition side debate. The reason is simple. Unfortunately, they never ever deal with our exact context. What unconditionally, it should not be justifiable. This is a fundamental failure of their side path. That's why we condemn. This debate should be about whether we should never justify such kind of association or not in an unconditional situation. We condemn in no, sometimes should be justifiable. This is a clear stance of opposition side. And given that, let me explain so why it's so especially so in this condition, so it should not justifiable. So I can explain this point. But before that, let me deal with some new argument from government way. Two things. So first of all, they try to say it's bad to shift accountability from a state to such kind of researcher. It's so immoral, etc., etc. But of course, it's not true. Of course, both should be responsible. This is our stance. Of course, even we punish such kind of researcher, it does not mean that the state can avoid such kind of punishment or that the state can avoid such kind of accountability. That's why their point totally mispointed. What can respond to their side of house? They have newly explained the possibility to abuse their own justification. The one fundamental question or fundamental failure of their side analysis is that why fundamentally they have an incentive to abuse it in the first place. There is no any analysis. Moreover, we have the reason why they don't have an incentive to abuse so much. Why? Simply because they are actor. Simply because it is obvious. If they abuse such kind of abuse justification, if they keep completely innocent researcher and who did not nice thing, it means who did not any contribution to a weapon or massive destruction. Anyway, it's obvious that we have to see a massive criticism from international society. It can mean that their position might be the weak because they cannot get enough support from this society. On the other hand, we can assume why they have the incentive to abuse completely does not exist. As long as it that never explain, we cannot evaluate this argument. On the occasion, we want to make our point to why it should not never be justifiable. Why should it not never justifiable? So first of all, what they try to contain, and all they try to contain the biodiversity problem or environmental host problem, or they try to explain the disproportionate punishment is unjust. And more similarly, CZ said, it's indirectly related. That is so problematic. But question is that whether this such situation can be the reason why do you not justify your assassination. We have already contained, and as all said, that as a same soldier, in the extraordinary situation, we can kill such an actor. And the closing of other closing of version will extend specifically what kind of character are involved in the such kind of battlefield. We specifically analyze in the such a battlefield, in the multiple cases, for example, United States, such a poverty soldier, based on poverty, even if they don't have incentive to kill others, but the environmental force, they have to be in this situation. And even some people just engage, not directly in the frontier or battlefield, just engage the supporter as a supporter of the battlefield, like the driving car, or such like having some food, or even such a situation, they have to be killed, unfortunately, as long as they are in the military basis. But in the other international society, we never punish such kind of situation to kill such a soldier who are not immoral, who are just forcibly involved. Such a by specific analysis, we can give a strong doubt to a genocide part why such a birth problem or indirect relationship can be the reason why to deny such kind of assassination in the first place. That this is a fundamental failure of genocide part. And then, let me explain our side of extension. We clarify what is the exact condition of self-defense. Why this argument is extremely important. The concept of self-defense is extremely vague one. It means we can say, under the name of self-defense, in order to protect myself, we can do something, we can kill others. But it's so vague. That's why we have to clarify what kind of condition we can do self-defense. And we explain, we have three conditions. It's already determined even the criminal justice system, even such a societal level. We have said that when the purpose should be self-protection, maybe this chair opening abortion, and additionally we contain such a when the such a situation of the existence of such an urgency, and the third of all, we explain when such a with the harm which we receive should be bigger than such a the harm we should give. And we have explained that specifically the applicability on this list. It can be justifiable. Such a case still exists in our side of parallel. So what does it exactly that we explain? So closing up might say that sometimes because they can replace a ton of researcher, it's okay. But we have already rebutted this point. It's impossible, it's unfeasible to such a replace researcher by one, after assassination, after assassination. Because such a research, what a research is especially such a we are talking about maybe cutting edge such a researcher, but such a very difficult research. We need such a to share the own knowledge. Even such a researcher develop their research to this extent. We have to share this knowledge. We have to analyze with other researchers how to understand to what extent they have to proceed. And now, what kind of problem we are confronting now? We have to share such information, but they are done. There are no any resource to share information. So when such the past record, we have to analyze what we should do. It's quite extremely hard. We can always assume it's extremely hard to such a continuously pass through their own research. This is a fundamental failure of their side part. This is a new debate. This is a clear extension from closing operation. Okay.
I think your standard is still vague. You can kill rich citizens who uniquely contribute to the state, attacking others. But why can't you just capture or isolate that person with less violation of humanity? And why is it just to jump onto other methods?
Maybe it has already rebutted by our side has, even opening version, even correct version. But when you say, let me engage this point. Uniqueness of assassination is that from a very distant area, we can kill by one shot. It means if you have to go to the such an area, to the capture, we have to open such the central or military bases. Because such as the enemy have the incentive to such a high, such an important researcher. It's impossible to go to such a central military bases and we have to capture by such an actor, by such a shooting, such a sleeping, etc. It's simply in terms of feasibility. We can obviously assume what is possible without feasibility. We never ever understand such kind of situation. That's why what we contain on this bed is that we specifically analyze what kind of character exists in the battlefield. And on the topic of regardless of such a morality or regardless of the force structures, we can justify to kill others. Moreover, let me second contribution from our side. We have already clarified what's the condition of self-defense, and we can specifically explain why it should be justifiable by this extension, so we can take this case.